The sky burned with fire as ships clashed above the valley. The war had started so suddenly that no one could remember who had fired the first shot. The humans were strangers in this part of the galaxy, a species that most called reckless and weak, yet they had shown courage no one expected. Among the chaos of falling debris and broken machines, a young alien girl with glowing blue skin stumbled through the ruins, her heart racing with fear. She had been trained to fight, but nothing could prepare her for what she saw on that battlefield. Name was whispered among her people as one of noble blood, but here she was only another soldier, surrounded by screams and dust. Her kind were taller, stronger, and bred for survival. They had studied war for generations, yet the human she saw, crouched in the rubble, did something that stopped her breath. He was injured badly, his armor shredded, his arm bent at a sickening angle. She could see blood soaking through the bandages he had wrapped himself with. Any other soldier would have fallen, yet this man gritted his teeth and sat calmly, staring at his broken limb as if it were only a tool to fix. The girl slowed her steps, her wide luminous eyes locked on him. The human's chest rose and fell with sharp breaths, but there was no fear on his face. Instead, he grabbed his twisted arm with his other hand and with one violent jerk, snapped it back into place. The sound was like stone cracking, echoing, even over the roar of distant weapons. She gasped, her knees trembling. Her body swayed, and before she could stop herself, her vision dimmed. The world spun, and she collapsed to the ground beside him. The human turned his head slowly, his jaw clenched from the pain he had forced upon himself. His eyes caught hers as she fell. For a moment, he forgot his wounds and reached out with his blood-stained hand. His fingers brushed her armored shoulder as he steadied her unconscious body. "Not the time to faint, blue girl," he muttered. Under his breath, though she could not hear him, he forced himself upright, pressing his back against a broken piece of wall. The battlefield stretched around him, littered with wreckage and sparks. Smoke curled upward like dark fingers reaching for the stars. His bones screamed, his muscles burned, but he knew he could not stop. If the alien girl was alive, she was his responsibility now. It was strange, he thought, how moments of war could bind strangers together without a word. The girl's body was light in his arms, though her armor made her look heavier. Her blue hair fell across his chest as he adjusted her so she would not choke. Her face, despite the dirt and fear, was striking, almost unreal in its beauty. Her people had always looked at humans as fragile creatures, yet here she was fainting. At the sight of his strength, he almost laughed at the irony, but swallowed the thought as another explosion shook the ground. The human closed his eyes for a second, breathing through the pain. He had survived worse. Back on Earth, bones snapping was part of training. He remembered the harsh instructors who told them, "Pain is only a message. You decide if you listen." His body had learned long ago to fight through suffering, to repair itself when no one else could. Out here, that strength was the only thing keeping him alive. He opened his eyes again and scanned the ruins. Enemy soldiers would soon return to finish anyone still moving. He had to find cover, had to protect her. The thought confused him. Why should he risk himself for an alien girl whose people had fired upon his kind? But something about the way she had looked at him, with fear and awe mixed in her glowing eyes, made him hesitate to leave her behind. He adjusted his grip, braced his injured leg, and pushed forward. Each step was agony, his body a broken machine, refusing to die. The girl stirred faintly in his arms but did not wake. He whispered, "Stay quiet, little star," not knowing why the words came. Maybe it was the way her hair shimmered even in the ash and smoke, like strands of light refusing to fade. The path ahead led into deeper shadows of the canyon. Somewhere within, there might be safety or another trap. He did not know. All he knew was that she had seen what he was capable of, and it had shocked her so much she had fallen into unconsciousness. In her world, maybe strength came from armor and weapons. But in his, strength came from survival, from the will to stand even. When the bones broke and the blood flowed as he disappeared into the smoke carrying her, the war still raged around them. Ships screamed through the clouds, fire lit the skies, and the ground trembled like a dying beast. Yet within the storm, a strange bond had begun, a human who refused to break and an alien girl who had collapsed at the sight of his raw defiance. Neither of them knew it yet, but this moment would echo through the galaxy. Asterisk. The human's boots scraped against the stone as he carried her deeper into the canyon. His broken body screamed for rest, but he kept moving. The alien girl was still, unconscious, her head resting against his shoulder. Her glowing blue hair brushed across his cheek, and for a strange moment, he forgot the chaos around them. She looked almost peaceful, as if untouched by the war that had swallowed both their worlds. He found a hollow space beneath a shattered arch of rock. It wasn't much, but it would shield them from sight. He lowered her gently to the ground and leaned back, sucking in sharp breaths. His arm throbbed from where he had snapped the bone back into place. His ribs ached every time he inhaled, but he had no choice. Pain was survival, and survival was the only rule that mattered here. The girl stirred at last, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment, she looked confused, as though she wasn't sure if the human was real. Then she gasped, scrambling weakly away from him. Her body shook, and her eyes were wide with disbelief. You broke yourself and then fixed it," she whispered, her voice trembling. The human gave a tired laugh. "Fixed enough to keep moving," he said. He tightened the bandage on his arm, his hands rough but steady. "I've had worse." She stared at him as if he were some strange beast. Her kind believed in healers, in advanced machines that could knit flesh and bone in seconds. The idea that someone could endure pain this raw, with no aid, was beyond her. She pressed her hand to her chest, trying to calm her racing heart. She had fainted at the sound of his bones snapping. How could he sit there, breathing as if it were nothing? Why? "Why would you do that?" she asked. He looked at her, his eyes tired but sharp. "Because no one else will. Out here, if you wait for help, you die. Simple as that." His words cut through her. She had been raised in a world where warriors fought in groups, where technology made survival certain. But this human carried the weight of his own survival as if it were normal. It made her feel small, fragile in a way she had never known before. She swallowed and glanced down at his armor, noticing the scratches, the burns, and the blood. Every mark told a story of battles survived. He looked more like a weapon forged by suffering than a man. Yet when his eyes met hers, she didn't see cruelty. She saw fire unyielding, relentless, alive. "You should have left me," she whispered. "I would have slowed you down." He smirked faintly. "Maybe, but I don't leave people behind, not even strangers." Her throat tightened. In her army, weakness was discarded. Those who fell were left where they lay. She had believed it was the only way to win. But here was a man, battered and broken, carrying her when he could barely walk. Something about it unsettled her deeply. The canyon rumbled with another distant blast. Both of them looked up. The war had not ended. Enemy patrols would soon search through the ruins. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled beneath her. He reached out instinctively, steadying her with his good arm. His touch was rough, but there was no mockery in his gesture. "We move when you're ready," he said firmly. "Not before." Her eyes softened. No one had ever spoken to her that way, not as a commander barking orders, not as a soldier expecting duty, but as someone who simply meant it. She nodded slowly, still shaken, still unsure. Minutes passed in silence, the air heavy with smoke and ash. She watched him as he tore strips from his cloak to reinforce his bandages. Every movement was careful, efficient. She realized then that his people must live every day like this, always on the edge of death, always forcing their bodies to obey no matter the pain. No wonder they were feared. No wonder they survived. "Human," she said at last, her voice softer now. "What is your name?" He glanced at her, surprised. For a long moment, he didn't answer, as though names didn't matter in a place like this. Then he sighed. "Call me whatever you want. Names won't save us." Her lips pressed together, but she didn't argue. She decided she would call him Fireheart, because that was what she saw in him, a flame that refused to go out, no matter how much the world tried to crush it. Another explosion shook the sky, closer this time. Dust rained down from the cliffs. He stood, groaning at the weight of his injuries, and extended his hand to her. Time to move. She hesitated, then took his hand. His grip was strong, grounding, as if he could anchor her against the storm. Together they stepped out of the hollow and into the smoke once more. The war awaited them, but now something else burned between them. Her fear of him had begun to change, turning into something more complicated, something she couldn't yet name. For the first time, she wondered if perhaps the stories about humans were wrong. Perhaps they weren't reckless or weak. Perhaps they were something far more dangerous, something the galaxy had never truly understood. The canyon narrowed as they walked, jagged rocks rising like the teeth of some ancient beast. Smoke hung heavy in the air, and the ground shook with distant strikes. The human led the way, his steps uneven but steady, his body held together by will alone. The alien girl followed close, her luminous eyes darting nervously from shadow to shadow. She had seen soldiers fall in battle before, but this man carried his wounds like they were part of him. He didn't speak much. His focus was on survival. Every few minutes he would pause, listening carefully, scanning the cliffs as though his instincts could sense danger before it arrived. She studied him in silence, trying to understand how a creature so fragile-looking could endure so much. Finally, she broke the quiet. "Why do you keep moving when your body is broken? You could rest. You could wait for rescue." He chuckled without humor. "Rescue? Out here? No one is coming. You wait, you die. So you keep moving. Always." His words struck her again. In her world, soldiers trusted the army, the chain of command, the healers and machines that never failed. But he had no one. He trusted only himself. And somehow that gave him a kind of strength she had never imagined. She felt shame at the memory of fainting. She had been trained to be fearless, yet she had collapsed like a child at the sight of his suffering. She lowered her head, her voice small. "I was weak." He glanced back at her, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "No, you're alive. That's not weakness. That's survival." The words stayed with her. She had always believed strength was shown through victory, through dominance. But here he was teaching her something else. Strength was refusing to fall, even when everything inside you begged to give up. They continued deeper into the canyon until they found what looked like an abandoned outpost, half buried under rubble. The human motioned for her to stay quiet. He crouched low, checking the shadows before stepping inside. The place smelled of burned metal and dust, but it was shelter. He lowered himself onto a broken crate, wincing as his ribs protested. The girl knelt nearby, her glowing hair spilling over her shoulders. For a long moment, she simply watched him. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted the bindings on his arm, yet his expression never showed fear. "Your people," she said. Slowly, "Do they all do this? Break themselves and mend themselves like you?" He gave a short laugh. "Not all, but enough. Where I'm from, you don't have the luxury of being fragile. Earth, it teaches you. If the world doesn't kill you, it makes you harder." She tilted her head. "Your world must be cruel." His eyes grew distant, remembering storms, predators, hunger, and endless fights to stay alive. "Cruel, yes. But it makes survivors. And survivors are what you need in war." Something inside her stirred. For the first time, she wondered if Her people's strength, measured in armor, numbers, and technology, was weaker than the raw, stubborn will of a single human. She looked at him differently now, not as a fragile creature, but as a force that refused to bend. A low rumble echoed through the canyon. The girl stiffened. The sound of marching feet approached. Enemy soldiers. Her heart raced, but before she could speak, the human raised his hand, signaling silence. His eyes narrowed, every muscle in his body sharpening into focus despite the pain. The patrol drew closer, their voices carrying through the smoke. She could see the glow of their weapons reflecting off the canyon walls. Fear clawed at her chest. In her condition, she couldn't fight. And he was half broken, bleeding, barely standing, yet when she looked at him, she saw no hesitation. His jaw set like stone. He reached for a jagged piece of metal lying on the ground, gripping it like a blade. His broken arm hung close to his side, but his other hand held the weapon steady. He was ready to fight, even now. "You can't," she whispered. "There are too many." He glanced at her, his eyes blazing with that same fire she had seen before. "Then we make them believe there's more of us. Fear will do the rest." The patrol entered the outpost, their weapons raised. The human stood tall in the shadows, his face smeared with blood and grit. The alien girl's breath caught in her throat. Even battered and broken, he radiated something her people could never replicate, an unshakable presence, the kind that made even seasoned warriors hesitate. The first enemy stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. Before he could shout, the human lunged. The sound of impact filled the air as the jagged metal struck. The patrol reeled, confusion spreading among them. From the girl's view, it looked like chaos, but to him, it was survival. Each move was fast, brutal, efficient, every strike designed not for beauty, but for ending the fight quickly. The girl pressed her back to the wall, stunned. He was bleeding, broken, barely able to stand, yet he fought like a storm, his body moving on sheer willpower alone. Her heart pounded as she realized she wasn't watching just a man. She was watching something the galaxy had never truly understood. A human who refused to fall. Asterisk. The last enemy soldier hit the ground with a dull thud, his weapon clattering against the broken floor. Silence fell across the outpost, broken only by the human's harsh breathing. Blood ran down his arm, dripping onto the dirt, but he didn't collapse. He stood tall, scanning the shadows, making sure no more soldiers remained. Only when he was certain they were safe did he finally drop the makeshift blade and slump against the wall. The alien girl stared at him with wide eyes, her chest rising and falling quickly. She had watched him fight through wounds that should have ended him. Every strike had been fueled not by strength of body, but by sheer willpower. Her people valued elegance in combat, movements trained and perfect, but this human style was raw and brutal. He fought like an animal cornered, and that was what made it terrifying. "You should be dead," she whispered. Her voice trembled with a mix of awe and fear. He laughed weakly, his head resting against the wall. "I get that a lot." She moved closer, kneeling beside him. The glow of her hair cast faint light over his battered face. His eyes were half closed, but they still burned with that strange fire she could not understand. She reached out slowly, almost afraid to touch him. "Why keep fighting like this? You're broken, yet you don't stop." His lips curved into a tired grin. "Because stopping means dying. And I'm not ready for that yet." The words sank deep into her chest. In her world, soldiers fought because they were ordered, because their honor demanded it. But he fought because his heart refused to quit. That kind of strength was alien to her, though he was the one not of her kind. She looked down at his wounds, guilt tightening her chest. "You carried me when you could barely stand. You risked yourself. Why?" He opened one eye, staring at her as if the answer were obvious. "Because you were there." and because no one deserves to be left behind. Her throat tightened. She thought of her commanders, of the countless soldiers abandoned when they fell. Mercy was weakness in her people's eyes. But here sat a human, broken and bleeding, who refused to walk away from someone he didn't even know. Her hands shook as she reached for the torn bandages around his ribs. "Let me help," she whispered. He blinked, surprised, but didn't resist. She tore strips from her own armor lining and bound his wounds with care. Her fingers brushed his skin, and she flinched at the heat of him. His body felt alive in a way hers never had, as if every breath, every heartbeat, was fueled by defiance itself. She couldn't understand it. As she worked, he studied her in silence. Her face was young, almost too delicate for war, yet her eyes carried weight. He could see the conflict inside her, the way her old beliefs clashed with what she had seen him do. He didn't say anything, but he knew that in this moment, she was changing. When she finished, she sat back, staring at him as if he was something unreal. "You're not like us," she said softly. "You don't fight for rank or glory. You fight because you refuse to fall. That's impossible." He chuckled, though it turned into a cough. "Not impossible. Just human." Her lips parted at the word, human. To her people, that word had always meant weak, reckless, fragile. But now, as she sat before him, she realized it meant something else. It meant unbreakable spirit, pain endured without surrender, fire that even death couldn't extinguish. The ground shook again, dust falling from the ceiling. The war outside was still raging. She looked at him, fear in her eyes. "We can't stay here. More will come." He forced himself upright, his body trembling, but his eyes steady. "Then we'll move, together." She nodded, and for the first time in her life, she felt safer, not because of her armor, not because of her training, but because of the broken human beside her. He had already shown her what her people had never taught, that survival was not about strength of body, but about strength of will. As they stepped out into the smoke again, she stayed close to him, her heart strangely calm despite the chaos. She realized then that she wasn't just following him because of survival. She was following him because she wanted to see how far that fire could burn. And somewhere deep inside, she wondered if perhaps her collapse at the sight of his broken bones had been more than shock. Perhaps it had been the first crack in the wall of everything she thought she knew. The galaxy feared war machines and great weapons. But maybe, just maybe, it would learn to fear something greater. A human who refused to fall. The canyon opened into a wide plain where the smoke from burning ships covered the horizon. Broken machines littered the ground, their twisted metal glowing faintly from dying energy cells. The human and the alien girl moved carefully through the wreckage, their steps quiet, their eyes scanning for danger. Every few meters he would pause, listening for movement, while she followed close, her mind turning over everything she had seen. Her people had told her humans were fragile creatures that broke easily. But this man walked on shattered bones, his body leaking blood, his strength carried not by flesh but by something invisible. She thought of the way he had snapped his own arm back into place, the sound still haunting her ears. She had fainted, overwhelmed, but he had endured it as though it were only another step in a long road of pain. She finally spoke. "My people call you reckless. They say humans cannot be trusted with survival." He gave a dry laugh. "Sounds about right. We're reckless, we make mistakes, but we don't give up. That's the difference." She studied his profile as he walked ahead of her. His jaw was set, his eyes scanning, his body moving with a rhythm that spoke of long practice. He was no commander, no noble, yet he carried himself with the weight of both. "Why?" she asked. "Why fight so hard when the galaxy already fears you? What are you proving?" He stopped for a moment, turning to face her, his gaze cut through the smoke, steady and unshaken. "I'm not proving anything. I fight because someone has to. And if I fall, then the people I'm protecting fall with me. That's all there is to it. The words sent a shiver through her. Her people fought for empire, for conquest, for pride. But this human fought for something smaller, something quieter, and somehow greater. He fought for the lives around him. Even when they were strangers. Even when they were enemies. As they pressed forward, she noticed the way his shoulders slumped slightly, his body trembling from exhaustion. She quickened her pace, moving beside him. "You can't keep pushing like this," she whispered. His lips curved into a tired grin. "I can and I will. Pain is temporary. Stopping is forever." Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, but deep down she knew he was right. Still, she hated seeing him break himself piece by piece just to keep them alive. Her hand brushed his arm lightly, almost without thinking. "Then let me carry some of it," she said. He looked down at her, surprised, then gave a small nod. For the first time since they had met, she saw a flicker of trust in his eyes. Together, they moved more steadily, leaning into each other when their steps faltered. The plain stretched long, and soon they reached a ridge overlooking the remains of a battlefield camp. Smoke rose from burned tents, and bodies lay scattered across the dirt. The girl's breath caught in her throat. Among the dead were soldiers from her people. She recognized their markings, their armor, their weapons. Her knees weakened. "They left them," she whispered. "They left them all behind." The human said nothing, only stared at the broken field. His silence was heavier than words. Her eyes filled with tears. For her people, leaving the fallen was tradition. But standing here, with the human's blood still staining his bandages, she felt the cruelty of it for the first time. "Is this strength?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Is this what we are proud of?" The human finally spoke, his tone low. "Strength isn't leaving them behind. Strength is carrying them even when you can't. That's the difference between us." Her heart ached at his words. She looked at him, at the broken man who had carried her through fire, and she realized he had already done more for her than her own kind would have. Suddenly, a distant roar shook the ground. Enemy reinforcements were approaching, their ships descending with flashing lights. The human tensed, gripping a discarded weapon from the ground. The girl stared at him, torn between fear and awe. He looked at her, his voice steady despite the pain in his body. "Stay behind me," she shook her head fiercely. "No, not this time. I'll fight with you." Their eyes locked, and for a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them. She wasn't just following him anymore, she was choosing to stand beside him. The ships landed, soldiers pouring out with weapons ready. Smoke swirled, the battlefield trembling with new life. The human tightened his grip, his body ready to break again if it meant survival. And the alien girl, once fainting at the sight of his pain, now raised her weapon with fire in her eyes. Had seen his strength. Now she wanted to prove she could share it. The soldiers poured across the battlefield like a tide of steel and light. The human stood at the front, his body broken yet unyielding, his weapon gripped in his blood-stained hand. The alien girl moved beside him, her glowing hair catching the firelight, her weapon raised with trembling determination. She no longer looked at him as fragile. She looked at him as a shield. The enemy advanced, shouting war cries, their armor gleaming under the burning sky. The girl's chest tightened with fear, but when she glanced at the human, his eyes held no fear, only fire, only defiance. It spread into her, filling her heart with something new. She tightened her grip. The first wave came. The human lunged forward with brutal precision, his broken body moving as if it had forgotten pain. Every strike was efficient, savage, and final. Beside him, the girl fought with renewed spirit. Her movements lacked the perfection her commanders demanded, but she fought harder than she ever had. Together, they carved a path through the enemy, but there were too many. For every soldier they struck down, two more appeared. The girl stumbled, her strength faltering. She raised her weapon again, but one enemy slipped past her guard. A blade flashed toward her chest. The human threw himself in the way. The strike cut deep into his already wounded side, but he did not fall. With a roar, he slammed his weapon into the attacker, dropping him instantly. Blood ran freely down his body, but his eyes still burned with the same fire. She froze, stunned. He had shielded her without hesitation. For her people, such sacrifice was unthinkable. For him, it was instinct. Her hands shook, but her voice rose above the chaos. "Why do you keep saving me?" His breath came ragged, his teeth clenched against the pain. "Because you're alive. And as long as you're alive, so am I." Something shattered inside her at those words. Her people had always told her strength was in leaving the weak behind. Yet here, in the middle of fire and blood, she had seen a broken human carry her, protect her, and fight for her when no reason demanded it. It was a truth she could no longer deny. Strength was not in abandoning others. Strength was in never letting go. With a cry, she threw herself back into the fight. No longer afraid, no longer doubting. She fought as he fought, driven not by pride, but by survival and loyalty. And slowly, unbelievably, the tide began to turn. The enemy hesitated. Their weapons lowered. For the first time, they looked uncertain. It wasn't because of her. It was because of him. Even broken, even bleeding, he radiated a force that shook them. They saw it too, that terrifying refusal to die, that human spirit that made their numbers mean nothing. One by one, they faltered. Then they turned. The survivors fled into the smoke, leaving the battlefield littered with silence. The girl stood trembling, her chest heaving, her weapon slipping from her fingers. She turned to the human who swayed on his feet. His body was torn, his strength nearly gone, but he still stood. For a moment, they only looked at each other. Then her legs gave way, and she dropped to her knees before him, her eyes wet with tears. "You should be dead," she whispered. "But you aren't, and I finally understand why." He gave a tired smile. "Told you, humans don't quit easy." She bowed her head, overcome. For the first time in her life, she felt true humility. She had seen strength before strength. In numbers, strength in weapons, strength in rank. But never had she seen strength like his. Strength to endure pain, to carry others, to refuse to fall no matter how broken the body became. When she lifted her eyes again, they were filled not with fear, but with awe. "You are not what we were taught. You are more." He staggered, then dropped to one knee before her, barely holding himself upright. His hand rested on the ground for balance. "Then remember it. Tell your people what you saw. Because one day, they'll face more of us. And they'll learn the same lesson you did." Her lips trembled, but she nodded fiercely. She would never forget. She would tell the galaxy about the broken man who stood against death and refused to surrender. The battlefield grew quiet. Smoke curled upward, carrying the memory of fire and blood into the night sky. The human leaned back against the rocks, closing his eyes for just a moment, his chest rising with shallow breaths. The girl sat beside him, her glowing hair casting light over his weary face. She reached out, not with fear this time, but with reverence, resting her hand lightly on his unbroken arm. "Rest, Fireheart," she whispered, using the name she had given him. "The galaxy will remember you." He didn't answer, but a faint smile touched his lips. For the first time since the war began, she felt hope. And in that moment, she knew the truth. The galaxy had always been wrong about humans. They were not fragile. They were unbreakable.